The morning light streamed through the kitchen window as Mei Lin watered her collection of herbs growing in mismatched pots. The fragrance of basil and rosemary filled the small kitchen of her modest country home. At 52, Mei had built a quiet life in the sleepy town of Riverbrook, far from her previous world. Most locals knew her as the woman with the magical touch for bringing gardens back to life. Few would ever guess she once commanded courtrooms and shaped legal precedents that were still taught in law schools across the country. Mei preferred it that way. After 20 years as one of the nation's top defense attorneys, she had walked away from it all. The corruption she'd witnessed in the justice system had slowly chipped away at her belief in the institutions she'd once revered. So, 5 years ago, she had disappeared from the legal world without explanation, leaving colleagues and rivals alike wondering what had happened to the brilliant mind who had never lost a case before the Supreme Court. The phone rang, interrupting her morning ritual. It was Rose, her 80-year-old neighbor who lived in the small blue house down the road. "May, I hate to bother you, but they've sent another letter." Rose's voice trembled slightly. "This one says I need to be out in 30 days. May frowned, setting down her watering can. "I'll be right over." 20 minutes later, May sat at Rose's kitchen table, carefully examining the formal eviction notice. Rose had lived in the same house for over 40 years. Faithfully paying her mortgage until she owned it outright. Now, somehow, Pinnacle Development claimed she was squatting on land they had purchased. "They say my deed isn't valid," Rose explained, her weathered hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Something about improper registration back when Thomas and I bought it. The man who came by said the judge would certainly rule in their favor, so I should save myself the trouble and take their offer." May felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest, the one she had deliberately extinguished years ago. "And how much are they offering?" 20,000. Not even enough to rent a decent place for more than a couple years at my age. May studied the paperwork more carefully. The company name, Pinnacle Development, rang a faint bell. The legal language was deliberately complex, designed to confuse and intimidate. It was a tactic she recognized all too well. "Rose, would you let me help with this? Just some basic paperwork to challenge the claim?" Rose reached across the table and squeezed May's hand. "I'd be grateful for anything you could do. You're the smartest person I know in town." If only you knew, May thought with a sad smile. Over the next week, May spent her evenings at her small desk, researching property law for the state and the specific history of land ownership in Riverbrook. She drafted a simple response to the eviction notice, careful to make it sound competent but not too sophisticated. She didn't want to draw attention to herself or her background. This would be a straightforward matter of proving Rose's legitimate ownership, nothing that should require revealing who May really was. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse, a stone building that had stood in the center of town since 1910. May dressed carefully in simple clothes, faded jeans, a plain blue blouse, and her gardening sneakers, still stained with soil around the edges. She pulled her graying hair into a loose ponytail and wore no makeup. Next to her, Rose looked nervous in her Sunday best outfit, clutching a folder containing her original deed and 40 years of tax payments. "Don't worry," May reassured her. "We just need to show the judge your paperwork. The truth is on our side." As they entered courtroom B, May immediately noticed the 3 men in expensive suits, sitting at the plaintiff's table. She recognized the confident postures, the leather briefcases, the silent communication between them. Wolves preparing for an easy kill. A chill ran down her spine when she saw the name placard on the bench. Judge Harold Richards. May had never appeared before Richards personally, but his reputation had reached her even during her final years practicing law. He had been investigated twice for ethics violations before being appointed to this rural district, effectively buried where he could do less damage, but still serve political allies. "All rise," called the bailiff, and Judge Richards swept in, his robes perfectly pressed, his expression already set in a mask of boredom. The proceedings moved quickly to Rose's case. One of the Pinnacle attorneys, A man named Gregory Powell, according to his introduction, presented their claim with practiced precision. He spoke of technical errors in the original land survey, about improper filing of deed transfers in 1983, about how the development company had legally purchased the entire tract from the rightful owner just last year. When it was their turn, May helped Rose to the defendant's table. Judge Richards glanced at them with poorly disguised contempt. "Your Honor," May began, "we have Mrs. Rose Miller's original deed and 40 years of—" "And you are?" Richards interrupted, peering over his glasses. "Lynn May. I'm Mrs. Miller's neighbor, helping her present her case." "Are you an attorney, Ms. Lynn?" "No, Your Honor." Richards sighed dramatically. "Then I should inform you that you cannot represent Mrs. Miller. You may be present for moral support, but unless you're a licensed attorney, you cannot speak for her." "I understand," May replied, keeping her voice deliberately meek. "Mrs. Miller will speak for herself with my assistance in organizing her documents." Richards nodded curtly. "Mrs. Miller, please proceed." Rose stood shakily and began explaining how she and her late husband had purchased the house legally in 1983. May quietly handed her each document as needed. However, each time Rose made a point, Judge Richards would allow Powell to object on technical grounds, sustaining almost every objection. When Rose tried to explain the continuous tax payments, Richards cut her off. "Mrs. Miller, paying taxes doesn't prove legal ownership if the original transfer was invalid. The law is quite clear on this matter." May felt her pulse quicken. What Richards had just said was a complete misrepresentation of property law. Adverse possession alone would have secured Rose's claim after so many decades of open residence and tax payments. "Your Honor," May said carefully, "perhaps Mrs. Miller could explain the principle of adverse possession as it applies to her situation." Richards turned his cold gaze to May. "Ms. Lynn, was that legal advice you were just offering? Are you practicing law without a license in my courtroom?" "No, Your Honor, just suggesting a relevant topic." "Well, don't. And for your information, adverse possession doesn't apply here because the original deed was never valid, according to the evidence presented by Pinnacle." This was patently false, and May had to bite her tongue to stop herself from citing 3 precedent cases that would have contradicted him instantly. Richards continued, "I see no need to prolong these proceedings. The documentation provided by Pinnacle Development clearly establishes their right to the property." He glanced at the papers before him for barely a second. "The eviction notice is upheld. Mrs. Miller has 30 days to vacate the premises." Rose swayed slightly and May steadied her with a gentle hand. "Your Honor," May tried again, "we haven't even presented all our evidence. The evidence you've shown is insufficient, and frankly, Ms. Lynn, your amateur attempts at legal arguments are wasting this court's valuable time." Richard smiled thinly. "Perhaps you should stick to whatever it is you normally do." Powell and his colleagues were already packing their briefcases, victory secured in less than 15 minutes. "We have the right to appeal," May said quietly. Richards laughed. "Of course you do, file whatever you like. But I suggest finding someone who actually passed the bar exam to help you. This case is clear-cut." As they left the courtroom, Rose was fighting back tears. "What do I do now? That house is everything I have." "We're not done," May assured her, feeling a familiar determination setting in. She watched as Powell and his colleagues strolled confidently toward the exit, as Richards disappeared into his chambers, probably to take his next call from whoever was paying for these land grabs. That evening, May sat alone in her kitchen, the scene from the courtroom replaying in her mind. She hadn't felt this kind of anger in years, the righteous fury that had once fueled her most brilliant legal strategies. She thought of her promise to herself never to return to that world, of the peace she had found in her simple life among her plants and quiet neighbors. But she also thought of Rose, who would lose not just a house, but a lifetime of memories. And how many others had been bullied by Richards and his friends at Pinnacle? May walked slowly to her bedroom closet and pushed aside hanging clothes to reveal a small trunk she hadn't opened in 5 years. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the key in the lock. Inside lay the remnants of another life, law journals with her articles featured on the covers, case files from landmark victories, a framed photo of her standing on the Supreme Court steps, and at the very bottom, her credentials. Attorney Lin Mei Hua, licensed to practice before the highest court in the land. She lifted out a heavy leather-bound book. Inside was the last case she had worked on, the one that had made her walk away. But now those same skills, the ones that had made her both famous and feared in legal circles, might be the only hope for Rose, and who knew how many others in Riverbrook. Tomorrow she would begin her research on Judge Harold Richards and Pinnacle Development. She would file an appeal, but this time she wouldn't hold back. Richards had no idea who he had just dismissed from his courtroom, but he was about to find out. The gardener was about to become the legal legend once more. The next morning, May woke before dawn. Sleep had been elusive, her mind racing with half-formed legal strategies and memories of courtrooms long abandoned. She made a strong cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table, where she had spread out Rose's documents the night before. The trunk from her closet now sat open in her living room, its contents carefully arranged on her coffee table. 5 years of dust had settled on law books that had once been as familiar to her as her own reflection. May picked up her phone and hesitated. Before dialing a number she still knew by heart. "Law Library of Carter and Associates," answered a young voice. "Hello, this is Professor Lin calling. I'm doing some research on property law and adverse possession cases in your state. I wondered if you might help me access some files." The lie came easily. She had been a visiting professor at several law schools during her career, and the title still opened doors. Within an hour, she had arranged for digital access to recent property cases in the county. As the morning stretched into afternoon, May created a spreadsheet of all the cases Judge Richards had presided over in the past 3 years. A pattern quickly emerged. In 38 property disputes, Richards had ruled in favor of developers or corporations 35 times. More telling, 14 of those cases involved Pinnacle Development, and Richards had ruled in their favor every single time. May dug deeper, following the trail of properties Pinnacle had acquired. Most were in areas now slated for a massive commercial development project called Riverbrook Renaissance. The project's glossy online brochure promised luxury condominiums, an upscale shopping district, and a golf course, none of which aligned with the rural character of the community or the needs of its residents. A soft knock at her door interrupted her research. It was Rose carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I brought you some apple bread," Rose said, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "It's not much, but I wanted to thank you for trying to help." May welcomed her inside, quickly, covering the legal documents with a newspaper. "Don't thank me yet, I'm still working on our appeal." Rose set the basket down and glanced around the modest home. Her eyes lingered momentarily on the law books visible on the coffee table. "I didn't know you were interested in law," she said. "Just doing some research," May replied, steering the conversation away. "How are you holding up?" "Not well," Rose admitted, sinking into a kitchen chair. "I went to 3 real estate agents today. Even with Pinnacle's offer, there's nothing I can afford in town. My friends, my church, my doctor, everything I know is here." May poured tea for both of them. "Rose, did anyone approach you about selling your home before this eviction notice came?" Rose nodded. "A nice young man came by about 6 months ago. Said he represented investors interested in properties on my street. Offered me $50,000 then, more than double what they're offering now that they claim I don't own it at all." This confirmed May's suspicions. First came lowball offers. Those who refused then faced dubious legal challenges and rigged courtroom proceedings. By the time victims realized what was happening, they had neither the resources nor the knowledge to fight back effectively. "I need to visit the county records office," May said. "There's something not right about how Pinnacle is claiming ownership of these properties." The next morning, May drove to the county administration building, a 30-minute trip to the neighboring larger town. At the records office, she requested access to the original land surveys and title transfers for Rose's neighborhood. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up from her computer. "That's the 3rd request for those records this month. Are you working with Pinnacle too? May shook her head. Just the opposite. My friend is fighting their eviction claim. The clerk lowered her voice. Between us, something fishy's going on. A lot of those original records went missing last year after some flooding in the basement. Convenient timing, if you ask me. This news was troubling but not surprising. May spent hours examining what records remained, taking careful notes and photos with her phone. She found a significant discrepancy. The land parcel numbers Pinnacle cited in their lawsuit didn't match the historical records for Rose's property. On her way out, May noticed a familiar face. Gregory Powell, the attorney, who had represented Pinnacle in court, was speaking with another man in an expensive suit near the building entrance. They were too far away for her to hear their conversation, but their body language suggested an argument. The second man jabbed his finger at Powell's chest before storming away. May kept her head down, praying Powell wouldn't recognize her from court. As she hurried to her car, she overheard him on his phone. Judge is getting nervous on too many questions and need to speed up the timeline. That evening, May called the only attorney in Riverbrook, a general practitioner named David Chen, who handled mostly wills and real estate closings. I'm sorry, but I can't take on Pinnacle, he told her, after she explained Rose's situation. Nothing personal, but I tried helping someone fight them last year. Suddenly I found myself being audited by the State Bar and the IRS simultaneously. My practice barely survived. Everyone in town knows you don't cross Judge Richards or his friends? Who exactly are his friends? May asked. David hesitated. Look, I've said too much already. But if you're serious about fighting this, you should talk to Tom Hargrove at the local newspaper. He was working on a story about the development project before his editor shut it down. The Riverbrook Gazette operated from a small storefront on Main Street. Tom Hargrove, a reporter in his 30s with perpetually disheveled hair, listened intently as May explained her concerns about Rose's case. I've been tracking Pinnacle for months, he said, pulling a file from his desk drawer. These development deals always follow the same pattern. They target elderly homeowners, people on fixed incomes, properties with complicated ownership histories. They've done it in 3 other counties already. Why hasn't anyone reported on this? Tom's expression darkened. My editor killed the story after the paper's owner had lunch with Judge Richards. But I've kept gathering evidence. He pushed the file toward her. This isn't just about greed, it's about water rights. The land they're targeting sits above the largest aquifer in the region. Control that, and you control future development for the entire county. Armed with new information and Tom's research, May worked late into the night preparing the appeal. She carefully crafted her arguments to appear competent but not expert level, using just enough legal terminology to establish the basics without revealing her true expertise. 3 days later, she sat with Rose in the courthouse, waiting for their appeal hearing. The same 3 attorneys from Pinnacle occupied the plaintiff's table, looking slightly less confident than before. Judge Richards entered, and May immediately noticed his irritated expression when he spotted her. I see you've returned, Ms. Lynn, he said. I had hoped you would secure actual legal representation for this appeal. No, Your Honor, May replied. Mrs. Miller and I have prepared our own filing. Richards sighed dramatically. Very well. Let's not waste more time than necessary. Powell stood. Your Honor, this appeal lacks merit. The defendant has presented no new evidence that would justify overturning your previous ruling. Richards nodded. I'm inclined to agree, but procedurally I must allow the defendant to speak. Mrs. Miller? Rose began to stand, but May gently touched her arm and rose instead. Your Honor, I'll be presenting our appeal today, as Mrs. Miller has authorized me to speak on her behalf as a friend of the court. A friend of the court requires legal training, Ms. Lynn, Richard said with thinly veiled contempt. I've done my research, Your Honor, May replied, her voice steady. First, I'd like to draw the court's attention to Exhibit A, which clearly shows the discrepancy between the parcel numbers in Pinnacle's claim and the actual historical records of Mrs. Miller's property. For the next 20 minutes, May methodically presented her findings, including precedent cases supporting Rose's ownership rights and evidence of continuous, uncontested occupation of the property. She deliberately kept her language simple but precise, watching Richard's expression change from dismissive to puzzled to increasingly concerned. Furthermore, May continued, the principle of estoppel by deed would prevent any challenge to Mrs. Miller's ownership after such a prolonged period, as established in Wilson v. Carter, a case decided by your own appeals court just 3 years ago. Powell interrupted. Your Honor, the defendant's friend is now pretending to be a lawyer. This is practicing law without a license. I'm merely citing relevant case law, Your Honor, May replied. Anyone can read court cases in the public record. Richards leaned forward. Ms. Lynn, your sudden expertise in property law is surprising. Where exactly did you acquire this knowledge? Public libraries are wonderful resources, Your Honor, May answered with a hint of a smile, as are online legal databases. The judge's eyes narrowed. Well, regardless of your self-education, this court has already ruled. The burden for overturning that decision is extremely high. I understand, Your Honor, May said, then added, which is why I've also filed a motion for your recusal from this case. A hush fell over the courtroom. Powell and his colleagues exchanged alarmed glances. Excuse me? Richards's face flushed red. A motion for recusal, May repeated calmly, placing a document on the clerk's desk. Based on the appearance of conflict of interest. What conflict? Richards demanded. Your Honor appears to have ruled in favor of Pinnacle Development in 14 consecutive cases. Additionally, county records show that your brother-in-law's construction company was awarded contracts for 3 of Pinnacle's previous developments. These facts could create an appearance of bias that might undermine public confidence in these proceedings. Richards stared at her, his knuckles white as he gripped his gavel. This is outrageous. Where did you get this information? Public records, Your Honor, May replied. Available to any citizen who looks for them. The judge abruptly stood. This hearing is adjourned until further notice. I will consider the motion and issue my ruling in writing. As Richards stormed out, Powell approached May. Who are you really? He asked quietly. May gathered her papers. Just a gardener helping her neighbor, Mr. Powell. No gardener I know cites estoppel precedents or files recusal motions, he said. What's your angle here? Everyone has a price. May looked him in the eye. Not everyone, Mr. Powell. Some of us simply believe in justice. As they left the courthouse, Rose squeezed May's hand. What does this mean? Did we win? Not yet, May replied. But for the first time, they're worried. And that's a good start. That night, May sat on her porch watching fireflies rise from her garden. The law book she had resurrected from her trunk lay open around her. Her phone rang. It was Tom from the newspaper. Something big is happening, he said without preamble. Richards has called an emergency meeting with the county commissioners. And I just heard from my source that Pinnacle's investors are flying in tomorrow. Whatever you did today, you've got them running scared. May smiled as she hung up. The raw, familiar rush of the chase was flowing through her veins again, the pursuit of justice that had once defined her life. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. Judge Richards had no idea who he was really dealing with, and soon he would find out. News of May's courtroom challenge spread through Riverbrook like wildfire. By morning, her phone was ringing constantly with calls from other homeowners facing similar eviction threats. She listened to each story, taking careful notes and seeing the same pattern repeat. Elderly residents, long-held family properties, sudden claims of ownership by Pinnacle Development. I never meant to become the town's defender, she told Rose over coffee. I just wanted to help you. Sometimes life has other plans, Rose said, patting her hand. People need you, May. You have a gift. A week passed with no ruling from Judge Richards on the recusal motion. May used the time to strengthen their case, gathering affidavits from longtime residents who remembered when Rose and her husband first bought their home, and mapping out the connections between Richards and Pinnacle's various shell companies. Tom from the newspaper called her daily with updates. Richards has gone into hiding, he reported. canceled his regular golf game, stopped having lunch at the country club. And get this, Powell had a shouting match with someone in the courthouse parking lot yesterday. My source couldn't hear everything, but it sounded like their investors are getting nervous. May wasn't surprised. Corrupt schemes relied on silence and intimidation. When challenged publicly, cracks inevitably appeared. On Thursday morning, a black SUV with tinted windows parked across from May's house. The driver, a man in a dark suit, made no attempt to hide his surveillance. When May walked into town to buy groceries, the vehicle followed at a distance. That evening, while watering her garden, she noticed a drone hovering overhead. A clear intimidation tactic meant to make her feel watched and vulnerable. May smiled, up at the camera. They were afraid of her now, still not knowing exactly who she was, but sensing she was more dangerous than they had initially believed. The next day, she received a letter from the court. Judge Richards had denied her motion for recusal, dismissing her evidence as circumstantial and irrelevant. The appeal hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. May had expected this. Richards couldn't recuse himself without admitting there was merit to her accusations. Now she would have to take her strategy to the next level. She spent the weekend preparing, surrounding herself with legal texts and notes. On Saturday night, she opened a dusty cardboard box from the back of her closet, removing a navy blue blazer and slacks she hadn't worn in years. She tried them on, slightly loose now but presentable. For Monday, she would shed a bit more of her gardener disguise. When Monday arrived, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread that something unusual was happening in Riverbrook's normally sleepy courthouse. May spotted several unfamiliar men in expensive suits sitting behind the pinnacle attorneys, likely the nervous investors Tom had mentioned. Judge Richards entered, his face set in a mask of judicial sternness. Powell and his legal team looked confident again, clearly believing their judge would protect their interests regardless of the evidence presented. "Before we begin," Richards announced, "I want to address Ms. Lynn's inappropriate accusations regarding this court's impartiality. Such baseless attacks on judicial integrity will not be tolerated. One more such outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, Your Honor," May replied calmly, standing at the defendant's table in her navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a neat bun rather than her usual casual ponytail. Several people in the courtroom whispered at her transformed appearance. Richard seemed momentarily taken aback by her professional demeanor, but quickly recovered. "Let's proceed with the appeal. Mr. Powell, your opening statement." Powell rose, smoothly. "Your Honor, nothing has changed since our last hearing. The defendant has presented no legitimate evidence undermining Pinnacle's clear title to the property in question. We ask that you affirm your previous ruling and allow the lawful development of this land to proceed." "Thank you, Mr. Powell," Richards nodded. "Mrs. Miller, do you or your friend have anything new to add before I rule?" "We do, Your Honor," May said, rising to her feet. She walked to the center of the courtroom with a confidence that made several observers sit up straighter. Gone was the hesitant gardener from the previous hearings. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit new evidence that directly contradicts Pinnacle's claim of ownership." She handed a document to the clerk, who passed it to Richards. "This is a certified copy of the original land survey from 1952, which clearly establishes the property boundaries that were later referenced in Mrs. Miller's deed. I obtained this from the state archives, where the records were transferred before the unfortunate flooding of the county basement destroyed so many local documents." Richards frowned, studying the paper. Powell hurried forward to examine it. "Additionally," May continued, "I've prepared a brief analyzing the relevant case law regarding adverse possession and property rights in this jurisdiction." She handed another document to the clerk. "Brief?" Richards raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Lynn, are you now pretending to file legal briefs?" "Not pretending, Your Honor," May replied. "While I'm not representing Mrs. Miller as legal counsel, any citizen may file an amicus brief for the court's consideration. The rules of civil procedure are quite clear on this point." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even without formal representation, few laypeople could cite rules of civil procedure or prepare proper amicus briefs. Richard scanned the document, his frown deepening as he turned the pages. This is unusually well-researched for a gardener. I'm a fast learner, Your Honor, May replied with a slight smile. Powell cleared his throat nervously. Your Honor, regardless of Ms. Lin's amateur legal research, the fact remains that the original deed transfer was invalid due to improper filing procedures at the time of purchase. That brings me to my next point, May said, removing another document from her folder. This is the original receipt of filing from the county recorder's office, dated May 15, 1983, showing that all proper procedures were followed when Mr. and Mrs. Miller purchased the property. She turned to address the entire courtroom. Interestingly, this receipt was missing from the county records. But Mrs. Miller kept her own copy, in her family Bible for 40 years, a fortunate bit of caution on her part. Powell's face had gone pale. He whispered urgently to one of his colleagues, who shook his head in obvious concern. Richards banged his gavel. Ms. Lin, where exactly did you acquire your understanding of property law and civil procedure? As I mentioned before, public libraries are wonderful resources, May replied, and I've always been interested in how our legal system works. Any citizen should understand their rights, wouldn't you agree, Your Honor? Richard's eyes narrowed. Your suddenly extensive legal knowledge strikes me as highly suspicious. I'm beginning to wonder if you're practicing law without a license. I assure you, I'm merely exercising my right as a citizen to help a friend navigate a complex situation, May said. Then deliberately she added, though I imagine someone with a comprehensive legal education would be even more effective in exposing the inconsistencies in Pinnacle's claims. The implication hung in the air. Several spectators exchanged glances, sensing the tension between the judge and the increasingly mysterious woman standing before him. Well, Richard said, regardless of where your information comes from, this court has already ruled on the fundamental question of ownership. These additional documents, while interesting, don't change the underlying legal reality. May nodded, as if expecting this response. In that case, Your Honor, I would like to formally introduce Exhibit D. She handed a final document to the clerk. Richards took it, his expression changing from dismissive to shocked as he read. This is a copy of a financial disclosure form filed with the State Ethics Commission, May explained for the benefit of the courtroom. It shows a series of payments from Westlake Consulting to Riverside Trust. Westlake is a subsidiary of Pinnacle Development. Riverside Trust is registered to Patricia Richards, your wife, Your Honor. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Powell jumped to his feet. Objection. This is outrageous and irrelevant. Is it? May asked calmly. The payments began 3 weeks before the first eviction cases involving Pinnacle came before this court. A total of $450,000 has been paid to date. Richard's face had turned a deep shade of red. Where did you get this document? This is private information. Actually, it's public record, Your Honor, May replied. Ethics disclosure forms are available to any citizen who requests them. I simply connected the dots between the various shell companies following the money trail. Richards banged his gavel repeatedly. This hearing is adjourned. I will not stand for these slanderous accusations. If they're slanderous, then they're not true, May said, her voice carrying over the commotion. But if they are true, then they constitute judicial misconduct and potentially criminal conspiracy. Bailiff, Richards shouted, remove Ms. Lin from my courtroom immediately. The bailiff, a middle-aged man who had watched the proceedings with increasing interest, hesitated. May held up her hand. Before I'm removed, Your Honor, you should know that copies of all these documents have been forwarded to the State Judicial Ethics Committee, the Attorney General's office, and several news organizations beyond Riverbrook. This is no longer just a matter for your court to decide in private. The men in expensive suits at the back of the courtroom were now on their phones, speaking in urgent whispers. Powell looked as though he might be ill. Furthermore, May continued, her voice growing stronger, I've prepared a federal civil rights complaint alleging a pattern of corruption and denial of due process. That complaint names not only you, Judge Richards, but also Pinnacle Development, its attorneys and several county officials who facilitated this scheme. She turned to address the packed courtroom directly. This was never just about Mrs. Miller's house. It was about using the power of the court to steal property from vulnerable citizens through fraudulent legal claims, all to control water rights and future development in this county. Richards pounded his gavel. "One more word, Ms. Lynn, and I will have you arrested for contempt." May smiled calmly. "On what grounds exactly, Your Honor? For presenting legally obtained evidence in a court of law? For exercising my constitutional rights to petition for redress of grievances? Or simply for knowing too much about how the law is supposed to work?" She gathered her documents. "The law is meant to protect people like Mrs. Miller, not to be weaponized against them by those with power and money." As the bailiff approached, still clearly uncomfortable with his orders, May handed him a business card. "When you're ready to do the right thing," she said quietly, "call this number." The card was simple, white cardstock with just a phone number and 3 letters, FBI. The courtroom fell silent as May helped Rose to her feet. Together, they walked down the center aisle, past the stunned spectators, past the panicking Pinnacle team, and into the bright sunlight of a day that suddenly held more hope than it had when they entered. "What happens now?" Rose asked as they descended the courthouse steps. May smiled, looking more like her true self than she had in 5 years. "Now the real legal battle begins, and this time I'm not going to pretend to be less than who I am." Behind them, raised voices echoed from the courthouse as accusations and blame ricocheted between former allies. The first cracks in the corrupt system had appeared, and they were spreading rapidly. By evening, the video of May confronting Judge Richards had spread across social media. Someone in the courtroom had recorded the entire exchange on their phone, capturing the moment when the supposedly simple gardener transformed into something else entirely, a legal force that had left the powerful judge sputtering with rage. May sat in her living room, the curtains drawn, watching the view count climb on Tom's newspaper website where he had posted the story, along with selected documents from the case. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors and strangers alike, all asking the same question: who was she really? A knock at the door made her jump. She peered through the peephole to see Rose, along with 5 other elderly residents from the neighborhood. "We brought dinner," Rose announced when May opened the door. "And questions, lots of questions." They gathered around May's kitchen table, the simple meal of casseroles and homemade bread creating an atmosphere of comfortable familiarity that belied the serious conversation. "You were magnificent today," said Henry, a retired postal worker, whose home was also on Pinnacle's target list. "But you're not just some gardener who reads law books in her spare time, are you?" May looked around at their expectant faces. These people had welcomed her into their community, never pushing when she deflected questions about her past. They had respected her privacy, and now they deserved the truth. "No," she admitted. "Before I came to Riverbrook, I was an attorney, a rather successful one." "Successful enough to scare Judge Richards half to death," Rose said with a smile. "Why, did you hide who you were all this time?" May stared down at her plate. "I left that life behind for good reasons. I saw too much corruption, too many powerful people twisting the law to serve themselves instead of justice. Eventually, I couldn't be part of it anymore." She looked up, meeting their eyes. "I came here to find peace, to live simply. I wanted to grow things instead of tearing them down." "Well, now you're growing justice," Henry said, "and we need your help. Pinnacle has targeted half the homes on our street." "I can't represent you officially," May explained. "I surrendered my law license when I left, but I can help you prepare. Your cases teach you what to look for." "That's more than we had yesterday," Rose said firmly. "We'll take it." After dinner, May checked her email and found a message from a name she hadn't seen in years: Catherine Wong, her former law partner. "Saw you on YouTube," the email began. "Nice performance, call me. Some people at the Justice Department would be very interested in what you've uncovered." May's hand trembled as she closed the laptop. The past was rushing back, threatening the quiet life she had built. But what choice did she have now? Richards and Pinnacle wouldn't back down easily, and more was at stake than just Rose's home. The next morning brought more surprises. A sleek black car pulled up in front of May's house, and a tall woman in a crisp pantsuit stepped out. May recognized her immediately. Diane Hewitt, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the district. "I see retirement suits you," Diane said with a wry smile when May opened the door. "Mind if I come in? We have a lot to talk about." They sat on May's porch, sipping tea and watching butterflies dance around the garden beds. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest," Diane said. "Richards is calling in every political favor he has, trying to make this go away. Pinnacle's investors are threatening to pull out of the project. And suddenly, everyone wants to know where the legendary May Lean has been hiding for the past 5 years." May winced at the word legendary. "I'm just trying to help my neighbor keep her home." "You're doing a bit more than that," Diane countered, placing a file on the table between them. "Your evidence about the payments to Richard's wife's trust? It's the thread that's unraveling a much bigger tapestry. We've been investigating Pinnacle for over a year. Money laundering, bribery of public officials, fraudulent land deals across 3 states. But we could never get close enough to Richards, until now." "What do you want from me?" May asked, though she already knew the answer. "We need you to come out of retirement officially, just long enough to help us build this case. Your reputation, your expertise, they add weight we can't get anywhere else." "I walked away for a reason," May said, her voice quiet but firm. "The system is broken, Diane. I couldn't fix it then, and I can't fix it now." "Maybe not entirely," Diane agreed, "but you just fixed it for Rose. And you could fix it for a lot of other people being targeted by this scheme. Isn't that worth temporarily stepping back into a world you left?" Before May could answer, her phone rang. It was Tom from the newspaper. "Pinnacle just filed an emergency motion to have all their cases transferred to another judge," he reported excitedly. "They're claiming Richards can't be impartial because of undue public pressure. They're turning on him, May." "Classic corrupt system behavior," Diane commented after May ended the call. "When exposed, they sacrifice one of their own to protect the rest." May's mind raced through the implications. If Pinnacle is trying to distance themselves from Richards, that means they're worried the evidence leads higher up in their organization. "Exactly," Diane nodded. "The question is, will you help us follow that evidence, or go back to tending your garden while they regroup and target different victims in a different town?" The choice weighed heavily on May. She had found peace in Riverbrook, away from the high-stakes legal battles that had once consumed her life. But she had also found community, people who needed her unique skills. "I'll help," she finally said, "but on my terms. I won't surrender my life here." Diane smiled. "I think we can work with that." Over the next week, May's small home became an unlikely command center. Diane brought in a small team of federal investigators who set up in May's spare bedroom. Tom contributed his research files, and Rose organized other affected homeowners to share their stories and documents. Powell, Pinnacle's attorney, attempted damage control, holding a press conference to announce that Pinnacle was shocked by the allegations against Judge Richards and would fully cooperate with any investigation. But his carefully crafted statement fell apart when reporters asked about the shell companies and suspicious payments May had uncovered. On Thursday afternoon, Powell called May directly. "My clients would like to discuss a settlement," he said, all his previous arrogance gone. "For all the affected properties." "I'm listening," May replied. "Full withdrawal of all claims against current homeowners, plus compensation for legal expenses and emotional distress. In exchange, your people sign non-disclosure agreements about the terms." "And the water rights?" May asked. A pause. "What do you know about the water rights?" "Everything, Mr. Powell. We know the homes were just the beginning. The real target was control of the aquifer." Another long pause. "Those rights would remain with the property owners with reasonable access agreements for municipal use." "Not good enough," May said firmly. "The homeowners retain full control of their water rights, with no encumbrances or access agreements. And no NDAs. Everything happens in the open." "My clients won't agree to that," Powell protested. "Then I guess we'll see them in federal court, where I'll personally ensure that every detail of this scheme becomes public record." I'm sure your investors will be thrilled with the publicity." After Powell hung up, Diane looked at May with newfound respect. "You haven't lost your touch." "Let's not celebrate yet," May cautioned. "They're still looking for a way out that protects their interests." The next morning, a dark revelation changed everything. Tom burst into May's house, his face pale with shock. "Richards is dead," he announced. "Apparent suicide found in his car in his garage." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this news. "Suicide?" Diane said skeptically. "Or a convenient way to silence him before he could make a deal with prosecutors?" "Either way, it changes the dynamics," May said, her voice somber. No matter how corrupt Richards had been, she had never wished for this outcome. Pinnacle will try to frame him as the sole bad actor, claim they were victims of his deception too. Sure enough, by afternoon, Pinnacle released a statement expressing shock and sadness at the judge's death, while subtly suggesting that any improprieties in their land deals had been entirely Richards' doing without their knowledge. "Classic scapegoating," Diane muttered as they watched the news coverage. "Make the dead man take all the blame." But May had anticipated this move. "That's why I asked Tom to publish those financial records yesterday. The money trail doesn't stop with Richards, it goes all the way to Pinnacle's board." Tom grinned. "And tomorrow's edition has the communication records showing they knew exactly what Richards was doing on their behalf. Their convenient narrative is about to fall apart." That evening, Rose organized an impromptu community meeting in her backyard. Nearly 30 homeowners gathered, all facing threats from Pinnacle, all looking to May for guidance. "We've been pushed around because they thought we were powerless," Rose told the group. "They thought we were just old folks who couldn't fight back, but they didn't count on May." All eyes turned to her, and May felt a familiar blend of discomfort and determination. For years, she had avoided the spotlight, preferring the quiet anonymity of her garden. Now she was being called to step back into a role she had once sworn to leave behind. "The fight isn't over," she told them honestly. "Richards was just one piece of a much larger system. Pinnacle still has money, influence, and attorneys who will try to wear you down." "But we have you," Henry said, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. May shook her head. "You have something more important than me. You have the truth, you have each other, and now you have the attention of federal prosecutors who can't ignore this case anymore." As the meeting continued, May slipped away to her porch, needing a moment alone. She looked out at her garden, at the peaceful life she had built, and wondered if it could ever be the same again. Her identity was exposed now, her past reconnected with her present. Diane joined her, leaning against the porch railing. "Having second thoughts?" "Just realistic ones," May replied. "Once this case is over, everything changes. I can't go back to being just the neighborhood gardener." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Diane suggested. "The world needs more May Lins fighting for what's right." May smiled faintly. "We'll see. First, let's make sure Rose keeps her house, the community keeps their water rights, and Pinnacle faces real consequences. One battle at a time." Inside, she could hear the community planning their next steps, their voices strong and unified. Whatever came next, at least she wasn't facing it alone. And for the first time in years, the thought of returning to the law, of using her knowledge to protect people rather than powerful interests, didn't fill May with dread. There was a purpose. Here, a chance to redefine her relationship with the profession she had once loved and left. Perhaps, she thought, there was more than one way to grow justice. 3 weeks had passed since Judge Richards's death. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a flurry of legal activity as the case expanded beyond Riverbrook. Federal investigators had seized records from Pinnacle's offices, and the company's stock price had plummeted as investors fled the growing scandal. May stood in her garden, pruning her tomato plants as she had done every summer morning for the past 5 years. But today was different. Today she wore a crisp white blouse tucked into tailored black pants, her first time dressing formally at home since moving to Riverbrook. In an hour, she would address the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee, formally requesting reinstatement of her law license. Rose appeared at the garden gate, carrying a basket of fresh muffins. "Nervous about today?" she asked, noting May's distracted expression. A little, May admitted, removing her gardening gloves. I never expected to go back to that world. They sat on the porch steps, sharing breakfast as the morning sun warmed the garden. Rose had become more than just a neighbor through this ordeal. She was now May's closest friend and strongest supporter. Have you decided what you'll do after? Rose asked. Diane keeps saying the Justice Department would create a position for you in a heartbeat. May smiled. I've had plenty of offers. Big firms in the city, teaching positions at law schools, even a book deal. But none of them feel right, Rose guessed correctly. None of them, May agreed. Those paths all lead back to the life I left behind. The prestige, the power battles, the compromise of values for career advancement. That's not why I'm returning to law. Before Rose could respond, a car horn sounded from the driveway. Tom had arrived to drive May to the state capitol for her hearing. Whatever you decide, Rose said, giving May a warm hug. We're all behind you. The 2-hour drive gave May time to reflect on the whirlwind of the past month. After Richards's death, Pinnacle had tried to settle quickly and quietly, offering increasingly generous terms to make the case disappear. But May, working alongside Diane and the federal team, had refused to accept any deal that didn't include full accountability. You're sure about this reinstatement? Tom asked as they neared the Capitol. You seemed pretty happy with your quiet life before all this happened. May looked out at the passing scenery. I was hiding, Tom. I told myself I was finding peace. But really I was running from a system I thought couldn't be changed. Now I see there's another way to approach it. The hearing itself was brief but intense. The Ethics Committee, composed of 7 distinguished attorneys, asked pointed questions about May's decision to surrender her license 5 years earlier and her reasons for seeking reinstatement now. I left because I lost faith in the system, May explained candidly. I saw too many instances where the law was weaponized against the vulnerable rather than used to protect them. I couldn't be part of that anymore. And what's changed? Asked the committee chairwoman, a stern-faced judge with 4 decades of experience. May considered the question carefully. Not the system. It's still deeply flawed. What changed was my understanding of my role within it. Walking away didn't fix anything. It just created one less voice speaking up for what's right. The chairwoman nodded thoughtfully. Ms. Lynn, your record before your sabbatical was exemplary. Your work on the Westfield case alone set precedents that protected thousands of homeowners from predatory lending. The question isn't whether you're qualified, it's whether you're committed. I am, May said simply, but not to rejoining a prestigious firm or building a high-profile career. I'm committed to using the law as it was intended, as a shield, for those who need protection, not a sword for those with power. After deliberating for less than 30 minutes, the committee voted unanimously to reinstate May's license, effective immediately. Several members even approached afterward to shake her hand, expressing admiration for her stance against judicial corruption in Riverbrook. Congratulations, counselor, Tom said as they left the building. How does it feel? May looked down at the official letter in her hands. Like putting on an old coat, familiar but not quite the same as I remembered. When they returned to Riverbrook that evening, they found Rose's backyard filled with neighbors and supporters. A hand-painted banner hung between 2 trees. Congratulations, May! Word travels fast. May laughed as Rose pulled her into the celebration. Small towns, Rose winked. No secrets anymore. The impromptu party continued into the evening, with residents sharing stories of their own experiences with Pinnacle and their gratitude for May's intervention. Henry had brought his guitar, and music filled the air as the sun set over the peaceful neighborhood that had so nearly been destroyed by corporate greed. Toward the end of the evening, Diane arrived, her expression triumphant as she pulled May aside. It's happening, she said quietly. Federal grand jury is handing down indictments tomorrow morning. 12 people from Pinnacle, including the CEO and Powell. Wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, racketeering, the works. And the homeowners? May asked, her primary concern still with her neighbors. That's the best part, Diane grinned. full restoration of all property rights, compensation for legal expenses, and a structured settlement for damages. Plus, the company has to place all water rights in a community trust that can never be sold or transferred to private interests. May felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. So, it's really over. This case is, Diane nodded. But there are dozens more like it across the country. People being pushed out of their homes through legal manipulation, corrupt officials working with developers, communities losing control of their resources. The pattern repeats everywhere. One battle at a time, May reminded her, echoing her own words from weeks earlier. Later, as the party wound down and neighbors headed home with leftover cake and renewed hope, May found herself alone with Rose on the porch swing. "So," Rose said, "have you decided what comes next?" May took a deep breath. "Actually, I have. I'm staying in Riverbrook." Rose's eyes lit up. "Really? Even with all those fancy offers?" "Even with those," May confirmed. "I'm going to open a small practice right here. Focus on helping people understand their rights, navigate the legal system when they need to. Nothing flashy, no big corporate clients. Just legal gardening, in a way." Rose laughed at the comparison. "Tending to people's legal needs instead of their tomatoes?" "Something like that," May smiled. "I've been talking with Tom about using part of the old newspaper building downtown. There's enough space for a modest office and maybe a community legal education center." "That sounds perfect for you," Rose said warmly. "But won't you miss the excitement of big cases?" May looked out at the peaceful street, at the homes that had been saved, and the community that had come together to fight for their future. "There's a different kind of excitement in watching justice take root in everyday life," she said. "In teaching people how to stand up for themselves rather than always needing someone like me to do it for them." The next morning, May woke early and went to her garden as usual. She still found peace among her plants, still valued the quiet, moments with soil under her fingernails. But now, hanging in her closet, a selection of professional clothing waited for the afternoon hours when she would meet with clients in her new role. 2 weeks later, a simple sign appeared above the old newspaper office on Main Street, Lynn Community Law Center. Below it, in smaller letters, "Justice grows here." The grand opening brought curious townspeople from all over Riverbrook. May had transformed the space into something welcoming, comfortable chairs instead of imposing desks, bookshelves filled with legal resources explained in plain language, even a corner with toys for children whose parents needed legal advice. "Not exactly what I pictured when I imagined you returning to law," Catherine, May's former partner, commented during her visit from the city. "You could be running a major firm, arguing before the Supreme Court again." May shook her head. "I did that life already. This is something different." As if to prove her point, the door opened and a young couple entered, looking nervous and clutching eviction papers. May welcomed them warmly, leading them to a comfortable seating area where she began explaining their rights in simple, clear terms. Catherine watched, gradually understanding what May had created here. Not just a law office, but a place where the intimidating machinery of the legal system became accessible to ordinary people, where knowledge was shared rather than hoarded as a source of power. By summer's end, the Lynn Community Law Center had become a vital resource for Riverbrook and surrounding communities. May divided her time between individual cases, community workshops, and training a small team of paralegals drawn from local residents with an interest in law. Once a week, she still tended Rose's garden, finding that her hands still craved the connection to growing things. And occasionally, when a particularly challenging case demanded it, she would call on her old contacts, reminding the powerful that the legendary May Lynn was still very much engaged in the pursuit of justice, just on different terms than before. The anniversary of her confrontation with Judge Richards, May sat on her porch at sunset, reviewing a draft of legislation she had helped develop to protect rural water rights statewide. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Pinnacle CEO sentenced today, 12 years, justice served." May smiled, setting aside her work to simply enjoy the moment. In her garden, the late summer flowers were in full bloom, vibrant and strong. Rather like justice in Riverbrook. Once nearly uprooted, now firmly replanted, growing steadily under careful tending. She had found her balance at last, not hiding from a broken system, but not consumed by it either. Using her knowledge to empower others, teaching them to nurture their own rights just as she had taught many of them to nurture their gardens. Different kinds of growing, but equally essential to a life well lived.